You are listening to the Disney Dream Girls, an unofficial Disney Theme Parks podcast, and this is show number 294 for the 29th of December 2019.
Where dreams begin.
Ho, 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 and hello to this very, very special Disney Dream Girls. And I have with me my good friend, the wonderful Disney historian, author and storyteller, Jim Korkis. Hello there, Jim.
Hello there, and hello to all of the listeners. I hope you are preparing for a very happy holiday season. This is the best time of the year, and there certainly seems to be a lot of connections between Disney and Christmas. You know, whether it's family or magic or whatever. The two just seem to go together, and certainly it wouldn't be Christmas for me if I didn't have at least one Disney item under the Christmas tree there. And there's certainly a lot to choose from. And if you don't have a Disney item under your tree, make sure you still keep listening, because we're going to be talking today about some Disney Christmas stories, so you can consider that as your Christmas gift.
Well, I'm all snuggled up, ready with my marshmallows floating in my hot Mickey cocoa, ready for some story times with you, Jim, because you are the master storyteller. So I'm just basically going to sit back, relax and enjoy as you entertain us all with your wonderful tales.
Well, how very sweet of you. That's a wonderful Christmas gift to me, and boy, don't set that bar too high. You know, I do love telling stories, and I do love telling stories about Walt Disney, and Walt, of course, naturally loved, you know, the Christmas season. But you know, he grew up very well, I guess there's no other way of putting it, very poor in Marceline, Missouri. And so, you know, as a very young boy, you know, the Christmas season meant, you know, going out with his older brothers to go try find a tree to chop down, you know, as the Christmas tree, and then make homemade ornaments for it. So Walt would, you know, sit around a pot-bellied stove with his mom, and they would make popcorn, and they would string, you know, popcorn and cranberries, you know, so there would be a garland around the tree. And Walt, even as a young boy, was very artistic. So, you know, scrap pieces of paper, you know, he would cut out little angels and stars, and sometimes he was lucky enough to have you know, find some little tinfoil to cut out into little ornaments to put on the tree. And of course, Christmas wasn't as filled with presents as it was for many children, and especially because Walt was born December 5th, and so what his parents did, and I don't know if any of the listeners there were born in the month of December. Sometimes parents will say, well, instead of, you know, you getting a birthday present and a Christmas present, we'll just combine them into one big present, you know. And that never ever seems to work out well, you know, at all. And of course, you know, the family being what the family was in terms of trying to run a farm that was struggling. Walt would not get a fun gift. He'd get something practical, you know, like underwear or a coat, you know, something like that. And you know that, you know, you don't want to look under the Christmas tree and find presents that are things like socks. You know, you want something a little bit more special. His older brother Roy would oftentimes try to do extra work around Christmas and get a few little extra pennies so that he could buy Walt and his younger sister Ruth, maybe something like a little toy top, and that was enough for Walt. Walt just liked getting anything at all, so it was like that was the most fun. And so as he got older, of course, Walt wanted to make sure that everybody got Christmas presents, and so his real joy as an adult was not getting presents, but giving presents to other people. In fact, at the studio, he kept a list of all of the children of all of the people who worked for him and contacts that he had in merchandise and in other studios and things like that. In fact, each child had a little index card that was put in a little wooden box, and so there were several wooden boxes. And one of the reasons for that was to track the child so that they wouldn't get the same gift each year. They'd get something a little different. And so the Disney Archive still has those, and so they put on display last year the little wooden box and displayed a couple of the cards, including the cards for two of actor Fred MacMurray's daughters. And so Walt felt that every child should get one big present and then a bunch of little presents, and they should each be wrapped separately. And so on the one of the sound stages was set aside even before November, for Walt's secretaries and all to be Santa's elves and go and wrap all of these things and address all of these things. And Walt would sometimes, drop down to, make sure everything was being done right. Now for his younger sister Ruth, who got married and had a son, they lived up in Oregon, and Walt was always very frustrated because he didn't know what size to get for a sweater or something like that. So every year he gave her something that fit perfectly, a check. And so and he always felt a little disappointed about that. And every December he would write a letter to Ruth, catching her up on what had happened, during the year, and enclose the check, and then always apologize for sending the check so she could get something that she really wanted, because he just didn't know what it was, that she wanted. And I don't know if any of your listeners do this, but over here in the United States, a lot of times around December, I'll get a letter from old friends that have sort of print out a list of what they did, and what their kids did, during the year to bring me up to date about what was going on, with their families. There are so many wonderful special Christmas presents that Walt gave, to his wife, to his daughters, to friends, and so let's talk at least about one of those. Most people who know Walt or who've read all those books and done the study know that Walt really liked animals, and in fact he really loved dogs. It's not that he hated cats, but he loved dogs. And there are some people who are just dog people, and he had a little puppy when he was a boy in Marceline that he loved. When he got shipped overseas to France right after the end of World War I, one of the things he picked up was a little German Shepherd puppy that and his friend got one as well, and his friend was coming back sooner, so took both dogs with him. And unfortunately, when Walt finally returned, he found out that his dog had passed away from distemper on the trip back from France to the United States. But his friend hadn't written to tell him because he didn't want Walt to be sad and unhappy all the way on the trip back. But anyway, when Walt got married to Lillian in the 20s there, one of the first things he wanted to do was, well, I'm married, I'm gonna to start my own house here, and boy, I'd love to, have a dog, and his wife says, absolutely not. and apparently Lillian didn't, or at least said that she didn't care for dogs. She felt that they were, they were dirty and they smelled and they shed fur, around the house, and she didn't want to be cleaning all that up and all of that. And so of course, you never tell Walt no. Lillian was always telling Walt no, and I think that was one of the great things about their relationship, because when she told him no, that just reinforced that Walt had to find out some way of making that into a yes. So, he went and he studied and he did this, and one night in their little house, he gave this presentation that he had found out that a chow dog was it didn't smell and didn't shed much, and all of these things. He'd researched every dog there was, and what is the best possible dog that would alleviate all of Lillian's objections, and it was a chow. And Lillian finally said, well, if we ever get a dog, then that's probably the dog that I would want to get, but we're not getting a dog. So Walt went out and got a chow puppy. and it was about 6 to 8 weeks old, and kept it in his brother's house, Roy's house, which was right next door to Walt's house. And so Lillian had no idea. And this was the reason he went out and got it is because it's close to Christmas. And so they were having, this was Lillian and Walt's, really first Christmas in their house here, their new house. And, so they invited over the family. There's the tree. There's the presents under the tree. Lillian's sister, Hazel, was there, and Hazel had a daughter by the name of Marjorie. And so Marjorie's job, and boy, my heart goes out to Marjorie because this was my job when I was just a small kid, is you had to get the presents from under the tree, and this was after the Christmas dinner. You get the presents from under the tree, and then you give it, to each of the people. You read the tag, and you have to make sure that everybody's got a present first before you go and find if there's any additional presents for any of the people there. And I remember my mom and dad dressing me up as an elf, so I should have phoned the police or something like that for child abuse. But fortunately, they didn't make Marjorie dress up, but they had her do this. So as Marjorie is handing out these presents to the people there, and of course, people are unwrapping them and, commenting and all of this, Walt sneaks over to Roy's house, which, again, is just right next door, and he puts the little puppy in a hat box and then ties it with this big ribbon, and then sneaks back in and slides it underneath the tree. He had warned Marjorie, so Marjorie knew, what all of this was going to be about. And so Marjorie, who, for a while there wanted to be an actor, as a lot of young kids did. She goes, "Oh, there's another one right here in the back, and it says, 'To Lily from Santa.'" So she picked it up and she starts walking towards Lillian. Now, fortunately, I had the opportunity to actually meet Marjorie when she was, obviously a lot older, and she told me this story, and she said, I started to walk to my Aunt Lily, and I got scared every step I took. And I said, well, why? And she said, well, I could see her eyes getting red, and I literally could see steam coming out of her ears, because she assumed that, yes, the present was from Walt, and that Walt had bought her a hat, and that Walt had terrible tastes in hats. And she had, laid down the law that she didn't want Walt to buy her any clothes or whatever, because Walt really didn't have that fashion sense. If it fit, that was fine, and so as she was getting closer to Lillian is, I told him not to get me a hat. He's gotten me a hat. And now in front of the whole family here, I'm going to have to say, well, thank you so much, Walt, even though it's going to be a terrible hat and whatever. And so Marjorie sets it on Lillian's lap. And before Lillian can do anything else, the box moves. And Lillian lets out a scream. And suddenly, peeking out over the top of the box, between the top of the box and the lid, is this little puppy's face. And at that moment, Lillian just fell in love with the puppy. And in fact, Walt says, I have never seen another person in my entire life as crazy about a dog as Lillian was about that little chow puppy that they named Sunny, Sunnee. And it became like a part of the family. It became like their child. It had to sleep with them in the bed, and wherever they went, the dog had to go with them. There's all sorts of pictures in some of the Walt biographies of Walt and Lillian and Sunny there, who apparently lived quite a long and happy life. And so Walt, of course, being really the great storyteller, went and told the story, to his artists at the studio, and they all got a nice laugh out of that and all of that. However, the reason I'm telling this story is because that story stuck with people so much that when they did Lady and the Tramp, the animated feature, you remember the beginning of the film takes place at Christmas.
It does.
And what happens is Jim Deere gives his wife a little Cocker Spaniel that is in a hat box with a ribbon, which was exactly the same hat box and ribbon that Walt had given Sunny to Lillian. And for those who probably don't realize it, Lady and the Tramp is the only Disney film that both begins at a Christmas and ends at a Christmas.
So technically we could call it a Christmas movie then, couldn't we?
Yes. And for those who come down and visit Walt Disney World, on Main Street over towards the right, there's a little hat shop which is called Le Chapeau, okay, which is French for, the hat. But if you look up, and again, when you're at a Disney park, you should always look up. You should look on walls. You should look down on the ground, because you never know what you're going to find. The little sign up there is a hat box with a ribbon, which is the same from Lady and the Tramp.
Aww.
Now, to get another O from you, Le Chapeau is right next to Tony's restaurant. So that's one of the reasons why that hat sign is there. It's not just to identify the hat sign. It's to make that transition to the Lady and the Tramp of Tony's restaurant there. So isn't it amazing all the Disney connections that are out there?
That's wonderful.
Ones that we just, and we just take all of these for granted, right? There's a reason behind all of it. And so that's one of the reasons why Disney storytelling is so strong, and one of the reasons that we get a different feeling when we're in a Disney theme park than we are at some other outdoor entertainment venue. It's because of all of this background. And even if we don't consciously know it, subconsciously, we're going, oh, wait a minute, something seems right here, And so you just start to connect the dots with that. Walt later told a magazine reporter that his best friend was his wife Lillian, but coming very close in second spot was Sonny. And when Sonny passed away, they got a poodle, which Walt named Duchess Disney, or Dee Dee. And the reason for that is because his nickname for Lillian was Duchess, because she was the absolute ruler when he was at home. At the studio, he was the boss. But as soon as he steps into the house, that's it. That's Lillian's domain, and so he used to call her the Duchess. So they named the dog Duchess Disney for that to happen.
But wasn't that a lovely story?
But what's going to make me happy is that telling another story. In fact, I'll tell another story about a gift that Walt got to his young daughters, and this is one that his daughter Diane told me herself. Late in her life, I got a chance to, meet Diane several times and talk with her, and she would send me emails and all of this, because I was always interested in these other stories that nobody else was interested in hearing, and this was a story that took place the year after Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs came out. And most people don't realize that's a Christmas film, because that came out December 21st, 1937. So we're heading towards a anniversary here. But, everybody figured, hey, this is Disney's folly. He's going to fall on his face. This is it. It's over for Disney. Well, again, huge hit, and a huge financial hit, not only here in the United States, but around the world. And so, even a year later, it's still running, in theaters and generating income. And so Walt wanted to do something special for his two little daughters, Diane and Sharon. And so what happened is the week before Christmas, he arranged things so that they were both distracted. There were things to go to and things like that. So they really weren't around the house. And what happened is he had the carpenters from the Disney studio come and in the backyard by the pool build a little Snow White cottage.
Oh.
And when I say little, that's it. It's a miniature cottage designed just for small children, so it had the little Dutch door. It had a little chimney, even though, it didn't have a fireplace. And, the windows and everything, were scaled down to, to the size of a child. And so on Christmas Day, Diane and Sharon were used to, coming out. It was a 2-story house. They were used to coming out. Their bedroom was on the 2nd story. They're coming out, and there was what was called a Juliet balcony. It's called a Juliet balcony, like from Romeo and Juliet, where Juliet would stand. A Juliet balcony where they could look down, into the living room. And, of course, there's a huge tree, and there's presents underneath it. And, they hung their stockings, interestingly enough, on the outside of their door. And Diane said, I think we did that so that it would be easy for Mom to put things in the stocking. And so Walt and Lillian take him outside, and there is the Snow White cottage. And Diane said, I absolutely knew that Santa had brought it because it hadn't been there before. It just magically, appeared. It didn't even occur to her that, Walt and Lillian were distracting them from not going out into the backyard, or the construction was covered, with a tarp and all that. So even if they went out there, they wouldn't know what was going on. It had little glass-leaded windows, and it had a closet. It had little cupboards with Walt had gone and gotten little miniature cans and little bottles filled with stuff, and there was a cooler tank attached so that when you turned on the sink, the water would come out, and there was a phone hooked up to the house.
Oh, wow.
So while Diane and Sharon and their dad were sitting there, at this little table in these little chairs inside the house, the phone rings, and Diane picks it up, and on the other end it goes, oh, this is Santa. How do you like your little house? And Diane said she was just absolutely afraid to speak, and that her eyes got really big, and she finally said, oh, thank you, Santa. It's just perfect. And then hung up, and then later, as an adult, realized that, again, Walt must have, scheduled somebody in there to do that, and made sure that he was in the house so that they knew it wasn't him, pretending to be Santa. And Diane said, boy, I was just adamant that Santa had brought the house. And she said the little boy next door, Morgan, one day said, oh, Santa didn't do that. I saw some carpenters building that. And Diane said, I just yelled at him, and I said, you're a liar. You're a liar. I was in the house all week, and I never saw any of that. And Santa, brought this house. And there's actually home movies, and they have these up at the Disney Family Museum in San Francisco, and they run them during Christmas time. And Walt is filming Diane and Sharon in this house. And as I said, there's a little Dutch door, so Diane is leaning out of the Dutch door, and this is a silent film, but obviously Walt is encouraging her to lean out because there's a shadow, across her face from the roof. And then as she leans out, she falls out. And Walt, you can see that the camera is being dropped, and Walt runs to her, to comfort her. And Diane said, and I remember my mom just standing at the side and just laughing. But she said, my dad, it scooped me up, and it was fine. It was just, more of a shock than, anything else. And, you know what? That exists on Walking Way, the house that Walt did, and that the exterior of that house still exists today.
Wow.
The inside has been gutted, and in fact, Diane saved some stuff from the inside of the house, and it's on display at the Disney Family Museum. But there's a filmmaker who bought the house and is trying to renovate the house. And so what that little Snow White cottage became once, Walt's family moved out of that and went to, Carrollwood Drive, it was used as a pool house. And so because it was right next to the pool, so it was used, for storage, for things to, clean the pool, and people could go in there and change if they wanted. It was a little cramped, but you could go in there and change into a swimsuit or whatever, or change out of a swimsuit, I guess, and do that. But Diane recalled that as one of her absolute favorite Christmas gifts. She said that her dad had a tendency to give her and her sister and her mom jewelry at Christmas because he was afraid, believe it or not, he was afraid that he might get forgotten. So she still has a little watch that on the back it says to Diane from Daddy, and that type of thing. And one Christmas, Walt gave Lillian a little bracelet, and it had reproductions of little Oscar statuettes for all the Oscars Walt had won. And just amazing. One of my favorite Christmas stories, though, really doesn't involve Walt directly, but took place at Disneyland, and I heard it from Jack Lindquist, who was in charge in 1955 when Disneyland opened. He was in charge of advertising and publicity, and he later became the president of Disneyland. He's written a book, so when you're looking for my books on Amazon, you might want to look for Jack Lindquist's book, which is some of his memories of working at Disney. Lindquist is the guy who came up with the idea for Disney dollars, which no longer exist, and for that cornfield in Iowa to be done up in the shape of Mickey's head and all of that. Lindquist, very creative guy, very nice guy. And he said, he had just started working for Disneyland, and it's Christmas Eve, 1955. So the first year Disneyland was open. It's only been open for, a couple of months now. And so he's on Main Street, and, the park is starting to close. And he sees a family walking down the street, a mother, father, and a 10-year-old son and a younger daughter. And he said, you could tell, that they weren't well off. They were clean, and all of that, but the father was in overalls, the son was in overalls. You could tell that this was a family that, was not very warm, and they were laughing and they were talking as they were walking down Main Street. And then they got to, the Emporium, that big final shop at the end of Main Street. And the young daughter just goes up and presses her face, up against the window, to look at the decorations and the stuff that was there. And then she turns around to her mother and she said, "You were right, Mommy. This is so much better than having Santa Claus visit us tomorrow."
Oh.
And Jack said, "I knew at that point that they weren't going to get any, the kids were not going to get any presents tomorrow, and probably the parents weren't either." And he said, at that particular point, it really stuck with me. This is what Disneyland means to people, And he said, so every decision that I made after that, while I was working for Disney, was based on my memory of that Christmas Eve and that one family, whose life was just transformed on Christmas Eve, to the point that nothing else mattered, nothing else was important. And I said, Jack, why didn't you take him into the Emporium and buy him a toy? And he said, I was a new hire. I didn't have the authority to do that. I didn't have any money. It was Christmas. I was tapped out. But that's one of my favorite Christmas stories about the park, and it's sort of related to Walt, because Walt, of course, that was Walt's park. And in fact, one of the reasons we have the candlelight processional is because Walt had an apartment over the firehouse on Main Street, and he told the Christmas music director, Dr. Charles Hurt, who is from USC, and in '55 he contacted Dr. Hurt to bring down 12 students, from his department to be dressed as Dickens' Christmas carolers, and wander the park and all of that, and then that developed into a Christmas concert in the band shell. But in 1957, he told Dr. Hurt, he said, wouldn't it be nice if we did something there in Town Square, and I could just listen to it from my apartment? And that's when Dr. Hurt came up with the idea of the candlelight processional and having it on the steps of the train station there, and doing the living Christmas tree. And Walt said, I don't want any Disney in it. I don't want any Disney characters and all of this. I want people to remember what Christmas is all about. And so that started in 1958, and then in 1961 was when they had the first celebrity narrator reading, the Christmas story. The narrators just love that. They went crazy. People like Cary Grant and Rock Hudson did it multiple times, and they did it for free, because they just loved being part of all of that. But it started with Walt Disney thinking that it would be nice, at the end of the evening, as people are leaving the park, that there's that final little, kiss goodnight, that final little, Christmas warm hug, you get as you go out of the park. And for those of you who are listening and who are not going to be able to spend, Christmas at Disneyland or Walt Disney World or Disneyland Paris or whatever, you can keep, those same things in your own heart, in your own living room, that love and respect for family, for magic, for caring, for giving to others. Walt was one of the founders for Toys for Tots, which is a program in the United States that's run by the U.S. Marines, where they gather up new unwrapped toys to give to children in need. And that all started in 1947, 1948, and Walt was one of the founding members. He even designed, free of charge, the logo for Toys for Tots, which is a little red train with, not a Lego train, but a little red toy train, because Walt loved toy trains too, so he probably would have wanted the Lego train for Christmas. But, and Walt would, do Christmas parties over at St. Joseph's Hospital, which is right across the street from, the Disney Studios and all of this. And Walt often did these things just anonymously. The only reason he would use his name is if the name would help, generate other donations or other publicity or whatever, He helped so many charities and all that simply because it was the right thing to do. And, at this holiday season, I hope the listeners, they also embrace their family and be grateful that they can spend a Christmas with their family, and also, remember just to celebrate the season and look forward to the new year with hope. It gets harder and harder each year the older you get, but every time you're part of Disney, that's one of the magic of it, is you're only 10 years old again. Christmas is also a time for joy and a time for laughter. And thank you so much for this Christmas gift of being able to share these stories with your listeners. And again, I hope they have a very Merry Christmas, a very Happy New Year, and that all of their Disney dreams come true.
Thank you so much for sharing your love of Disney with us, your stories, keeping them alive. And as Jim said, we will put on our website links where you can purchase all the books, whether you're in the United States, Australia, Germany, England, wherever. You can just go into your Google and search Jim Korkis books, Amazon, any other good bookstore. I highly recommend them. I have the set of Vault of Walt, and I love dipping in and out reading the stories, because it really does keep alive the magic. And thank you, my friend, for coming on, having a chat with us, and I can't wait to meet up again and share some of that Cadbury goodness with you once more.
Thank you so much. And again, Merry Christmas.
And to you, my lovely.
This podcast is part of the After Dark Podcast Network.